2 Samuel 13 and Susanna are two texts seldom read in church for obvious reasons. They're uncomfortable and unsettling stories about sexual violence, coercion, in each case by powerful men in positions of high power, the crown prince, two justices of Israel who have been entrusted in the high courts to determine guilt and innocence. In both stories, the men see how the woman looks in the story and objectify her. Because they can act, they do, and hide behind their power or credentials, and their lusting leads them to scheme and turn to attempts to seduce and rape each of the women in the text. According to 2023 statistics from the Rape, Abuse, and Incest Network nationally, out of every 1,000 rape cases, 1/3 will never be reported to police. That's a guesstimate. Out of every 1,000 that are, 50 will lead to an arrest. Out of 1,000. According to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 1 in every 5 women will experience sexual assault or rape in their lifetime, near 90% of them from someone they know. This also happens to men. I had a man in a church I served prior to this one who had called police on his wife for her assaults upon him, her abuse, mental, physical, sexual, though he was much bigger than she. And the first officers to arrive to the reporting scene laughed at him. Looked at him, much bigger than her. Okay, they didn't have to say it. But the implication is, what kind of man are you? And he was ashamed, despite the terror that lived for he and his children in their home. So I don't want to leave men out of this discussion. This is primarily to women in these texts. And when I say it is a modern day phenomenon, when I say the names Deshaun Watson, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, rapper P. Diddy, Matt Gaetz, Harvey Weinstein, judges, priests, ministers, athletes, senators, presidents, people who hold power, but who sometimes use that power in a way to hurt the vulnerable. This happens today, whether we were talking about date rape or an instance with someone in a position of vulnerability traffics children or young adults for sex. It happens in Downers Grove. It happens to youth in Downers Grove and to young adults in Downers Grove. Not too long ago, I came into contact with a youth who had online met somebody who they thought was a peer, dating age, who was actually an adult, who asked them progressively to take pictures. And once they had pictures they wanted, then revealed who they really were and threatened to show these pictures to their classmates, to their family, to their church friends. Devastating this young person's life in panic and anxiety. The majority of children who are trafficked don't go anywhere. They are trafficked from whatever home situation in the United States they're living in, and the average age is 15. So yes, this happens today. But we don't really talk about it very much, do we? To the text. 2 Samuel 13 begins, after these things had passed. What things? Well, it's not a coincidence that this text about the crown prince happens right after 2 Samuel 12. Anybody remember what happens in 2 Samuel 12? King David, at the time when kings go to war, stays home. And from his rooftop spies a woman named Bathsheba. he sends his men to discover who she is. When they come back and tell him she is the wife of Uriah the Hittite, that might not mean anything to you or I, but Uriah the Hittite is one of David's 30 professional fighting men who traveled with him when King Saul was after him and the kingdom was in turmoil because Saul was jealous of David and afraid he was going to take his kingship, so he was hunting him down like a dog. And twice, at least twice, Uriah helped save David's life. He's a loyal soldier, and he's his friend. At least I think Uriah probably considers himself to be David's friend. But David sees his wife, sends for her. She comes to his room. He has sex with her. He sends her away. If you read the text, Bathsheba has no voice. And many times I've seen it portrayed that Bathsheba is, she's bathing out in the open. She's careless. She's promiscuous, whatever. I've heard these kind of things in sermons and texts. And the only thing Bathsheba says in the story, several months after David has sent her away, is, "I'm late. I'm pregnant." He is the king. He has told her to come to his palace. She doesn't know anything else. He sent an armed detachment to bring her. And you're going to tell me that it's her fault? She has some power here? This is the backdrop of the story about the crowned prince. To reiterate, David saw something he wanted. He knew he could have it, even though it wasn't right. And then when Bathsheba says, "I'm pregnant," he calls his friend Uriah home from the battlefront. He has a great welcome home party for him. He wines and dines him. He says, "Go home to your wife so that, we can cover this up." He doesn't tell Uriah this, but 9 months from now, you'll think it was your kid, not mine, right? When Uriah, this loyal servant, refuses to go back to his wife because he says, "King, great king, how could I do that? How could I go home to my wife and my family when my brothers are out fighting for you, O king?" I won't do it. And he sleeps on his doorstep. So David writes a letter to his generals, seals it up, puts his stamp on it, send this guy out to the front lines on a suicide mission and make sure he's killed. Has power, uses power. Lust, adultery, murder. A man after God's own heart, but one sin leads to another, cover up. Finally, Nathan the prophet confronts him. So we have young Amnon, first in line for the throne. Amnon isn't feeling well. He says that he is in love with his sister Tamar because she's so beautiful. You ever been lovesick? You think, "Oh, I'm going to try to arrange my schedule so I run into somebody, so we bump into each other and use the occasion." That's kind of the playfulness of a chase, maybe your infatuation with somebody. But is that really what Amnon's describing? Because as Joe read, Amnon says this isn't just like puppy love or the thrill of the hunt, chasing and trying to get to know one another. No, the text says she was a virgin and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Wait a minute, that doesn't sound like love, that sounds like lust. Prince sees a beautiful girl. Prince knows he can't have a beautiful girl. She's a virgin, and by Jewish law, he cannot. Who does this remind you of? The wheels of power go into motion, and the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree. Amnon goes looking for a friend's advice. You have good friends? In my life, a good friend is somebody who will tell you when you're wrong, who isn't afraid to tell you the truth and say, "You're off your rocker, you lost your mind, this is a bad idea." But that's not really what Amnon is after. He's really after a friend who's going to be a yes man. And so he finds his cousin Jonadab, who the Bible describes in a very specific way. In fact, he's the only human being that the Bible describes this way. as, in verse 3, a very crafty man. There's only one other living thing described with this phrase in the Bible, and it comes from the book of Genesis, and it's the serpent with Adam and Eve in the garden. I want you to hear this in the words of these texts. Amnon knows that he can't have Tamar, so he counts on his counsel of his friend, and in the words of Harry Potter, mischief managed. These two scheme to play sick, have his sister come in and make food for him. That way he can see her, and one thing will lead to another. Is a story that Jonadab cooks up to tell your dad. Notice he gets, tell your dad the king. Get the king in on this. And notice that what Amnon actually tells the king is changed from what Jonadab tells him to do. I'm feeling sick. Have my sister come to my place and make cakes for me, and that'll make me feel better. Now, time out. I know this is way back in ancient times. But if I'm a parent and my daughters say to me, I am a parent, my daughters say to me at 2 a.m, hey, Dad, we want to have the car because we want to go hang with some friends. First of all, you're not old enough to drive. Second of all, it's 2 a.m. No. Daughters don't go to their son's bedroom to make cakes, even in ancient times, because they're a little bit sick. Where are the alarm bells, David? Does this sound like a good idea? He tells his daughter to go to the house. And notice the language. He sees her. I want to take the food out of your hand and eat. See, take, eat. Echoes of Genesis quite deliberately. God really tell you this is a bad idea? Look at that fruit. Just take it. Take a bite. Eat it. Nothing bad's going to happen. Whoever wrote this one, Amnon knows it's wrong, but he wants her, and he puts the plan into motion. He sends everyone out of the room. All these people who are serving the prince. Imagine being there as she's making this food. You're one of the servants of the king, and there's this weird energy or vibe in the room. This isn't something that happens normally. And she's making this food in this chamber, and he tells everybody, the servants who are there, because he's sick, to get out. Now I wonder what these servants are thinking. This is an unusual request of the prince. This doesn't seem right. Do they know that something bad is about to happen? Are their spiritual alarm bells going off and they're just too afraid to say something because he's their boss? He's the crown prince? Do the people in the story of Susanna, who know Susanna's character, no, she wouldn't do this. No, there's no young man. No, this is all a bunch of lies. And yet, these guys are judges. So none of us is going to stand up and defend her honor. Nobody? Not a friend in the room. It's just her voice. Don't want to be on the wrong side of powerful men or women. Even if we might know the truth of a story, self-preservation in both these texts wins the day, and truth be told, often in our own lives. So, he sends them out of the room, and she is left with her brother. Amnon grabs her and begins to force himself on her. How many times does a girl have to say no? Ideally, a person is raised well enough that it's never in a situation where it even has to come up. But once is it. No is no. Listen to how many times Tamar tells her brother to stop. He says, "Come lie with me." She says in verse 12, "No, my brother." 2, "Do not force yourself on me." 3, For such a thing is not done in Israel. This is wrong. 4. Do not do such a vile thing. This is evil, what you are doing. 5. As for me, how could I carry my shame? I'll never be the same if you continue to do this to me. 6. And you, brother, you would be regarded as a scoundrel and a lowlife in Israel, a good for nothing. If you do this translation, you will throw away your life and the crown. Is your reputation really worth what you're about to do? 7. Call the king. Notice she doesn't say dad. There's a right way and a wrong way to do this, to go about this. Talk to the king. If you really love me, we can do this the right way. Not like this. 7 times, she tells her brother to stop. 7 times, he runs through the stop signs. She is the only voice of truth in this text, and it is a lonely one. For Susanna, it's even worse in some ways. Because not only these 2 judges lie about her, they drag her. Could you imagine this? They drag her children, her parents, her friends. And they spew all these lies, ruining her reputation, and all they can do is watch. These lies of a young man, this filthy woman portraying her as something she's not, and a justice system that believes them and condemns an innocent woman. Can you imagine? 9 years ago, a case went national. Out of Stanford University, you may remember it, All-American swimmer was accused of raping an Emily Doe outside of a frat house. She was fully unconscious when those who witnesses saw this occur, and he was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 6 months, 3 years of probation. His father wrote to the court saying the punishment was too harsh for 20 minutes of action out of his boy's 20 years of life. Meanwhile, Emily Doe received hate mail in the opinion columns written about her, labeling her as promiscuous, loose, as if it was her fault by how she had dressed, perhaps too loosely, for being too inebriated, and perhaps had a problem with alcohol because she was passed out and shows poor judgment. She probably, quote, had it coming. After all this, her attacker continued, despite ample evidence, DNA evidence, and witnesses, to deny having ever assaulted her. She read a statement in court, just a portion of it briefly. I wanted to take off my body like a jacket and leave it at the hospital with everything else. I thought to myself, there's no way this is going to trial. There are witnesses. There's dirt in my body. He ran. He was caught by police. He's going to settle. He's going to formally apologize, and we'll both somehow move on with our lives. But instead, my lawyer told me that he hired a powerful attorney, expert witnesses, private investigators who were going to try to find details about my personal life to use against me, loopholes in my story to invalidate it, and my sister, and in order to show that a sexual assault was, in fact, a misunderstanding, and that he had simply been confused. Tamar names it before Amnon. He hears her. Make no mistake, he hears her. He knows in his gut what she's saying is true. Look at his reaction after he rapes her. His lust, his absolute desire to have her turns to absolute loathing because she reflects everything he's done. Get out. No, my brother, that would be even worse than what you've already done to me. This may be the most courageous woman in all the Bible. And it may be difficult for us to hear, why would Tamar refused to go out? Well, because in ancient times, and according to Torah law, if a man raped a woman, she's in society shamed for life. Nobody's going to marry her. Nobody's going to make her part of their family. So according to Deuteronomical law, I know this goes against a lot of our sensibilities today, but it was the law that the man's responsibility to make it right, nothing makes this right, by the way, was his obligation then to pay for her damages to the family, to marry her, and responsible to care for her because he had damaged her and her family's reputation. Again, I'm not saying this is a good law, but that was the making it right in ancient times. She's calling him out to make it right, to marry her, and to not send her out. He calls for his servant. The servant comes and takes her and throws her out and locks the door. Now again, I'd ask, how far did these servants go? Clearly the servant is close enough to hear him calling him back. Are they all just standing out there looking at their toes as they hear what's going on in there? And again, I'd press the point. At what point does your boss, the person who has your financial, your social reputation, whatever, in their power, but at what point do you say, this is wrong? Do you step in? Do you say, run, Tamar? Do you say, stop it? These servants are not on equal power footing with the prince, certainly, but nobody says anything. Nobody has the courage to confront Amnon, and he sends her away. Tamar will not pretend, however. This girl's got guts. She put ashes on her head. She rends her robe of virginity as a princess of Israel. Inside the court, she cries and wails aloud. Her brother comes and takes her to her house. But she will not pretend that this did not happen to her body. In the last paragraph, we see her brother, Absalom, David's third son in line for the kingship, comforting his sister, don't take this to heart. It's the equivalent of, telling her to just quiet her spirit, but at the same time, you think, geez, are you telling her just to let it go? And we find out, if you read the story later, that Absalom has no intention of letting it go. His anger and vengeance against what this guy did to his sister, he's going to end up killing him. But I think as I read this story about how many families have come to me, how many stories I've heard and confessions as a pastor when somebody in a family has done something terrible to another family member and nobody's saying anything. And sometimes family aren't believing the person in the family who said, this uncle, this aunt, this brother, this sister did this to me. And the pain therein. We don't want to believe that somebody in our family would do this. We don't want to believe that somebody that we love can also be a monster, a predator. And where is the king? Where is Dad in all this? It says that David is angry, but he won't punish his son because he loves him. Again, he can't accept that this is the truth about Amnon and what Amnon has done. He doesn't confront his son. He doesn't go to his daughter. He just is upset and it bothers him, but he doesn't deal with it at all. Just leaves it. And everybody loses. Everybody loses. Where is the hope in these texts, these heavy texts? Where is God in these texts? Where is the good news in these texts? Well, first, brothers and sisters, we're not going to go out of here skipping, singing Kumbaya. It's not a happy ending to these stories. But first and foremost, I want to say this. The Bible is not silent on sexual violence. Quite the opposite. The Bible is not silent when others exploit the vulnerable and speaks truth to power. For Susanna, she is exonerated. But what does exoneration mean? She's still been dragged through the mud. She's still been wrongfully accused. Her family has heard people say terrible rumors and lies about her. Her children, how do they unhear that? How do they move forward as a family when all these things have been done? And in the case of public opinion, in that court, there are always going to be some that gossip and that wonder and rumors that fly. Her amazing character and devotion to God is always going to have a blemish because of the darkness of what others have put on it. So exonerated, yes, but not pain-free, not clean slate. And for Tamar, for the Tamars and Susannas and those who have been subjected to these kind of things, perhaps most importantly, despite awful, ugly, cruel sin done against her, perhaps against some of you listening, I want you to hear this. Somebody else's sinful choices and dark cruelties do not define who you are. Something done to you is not you. It's something that somebody did in violation of you. Despite the scars and pains and things that make you shudder and cringe and loathe and feel dirty inside your own body, you are more than that which somebody has forced upon you, more than any scar or ugliness or sin that has happened as a result of human evil. This is not something of God. God is not ashamed of you. God is not embarrassed of you. God loves you. And God did not want that for you. Nor does God want pain or power to hold you forever, but rather to delight and delights in the one he has made or she has made. Delight that cannot be diminished by the darkness of another that is forced upon you. You are a beloved son, daughter, child of the living God, and always will be. And third, for the Amnons in the room or listening, for perpetrators of abuse or violence, trafficking, or rape, stop. Stop. No human being made in the image of God is meant for your objectivity or whims, an object to be conquered. We are to see the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. If that means you need to go to counseling, need to get help, need to confess, need to come clean, but it's not okay. And though the world might slough it off or ignore it, our buddies in the locker room might give you slaps on the back or high fives, the Holy Spirit certainly will not. And lastly, and perhaps just as important as any of the other three, for those who are servants or observers, there was a moment in my own life when a friend of mine, a young college student, we were both in college, we were both juniors in college, she was seeing a guy in a Christian youth group that was on campus. He was a worship leader. He was very charismatic, very good-looking young man. But I had heard things from other girls about him, things he had done to them. And I remember watching my friend who had been out at one of the bars, looking like she wasn't quite 100%, getting into his car. And I remember thinking to myself, I should say, hey, you want to come walk? I'll walk you home instead of getting in that car with that guy, because I don't think that's a good idea. And I didn't. Not because I didn't want to, not because, I don't know, I just didn't in that moment. I didn't act fast enough. I didn't process it fast enough. I didn't have enough courage, whatever it was, but I had a moment and I didn't take it. And it wasn't as bad as Tamar, but it wasn't good either. So for those of us who see something, who have a sense of something, and say, say something. Don't be silent. May the people of God as community acknowledge that sometimes in the kingdom of earth, it's not as it is in heaven. We got to call it out and name it. Support those who have been victims. And encourage those who are perpetrators to get help so that healing can happen. Because this isn't ancient time stuff. It's stuff that happens today. Stuff that happens to some of you. Let's not pretend it doesn't exist. Amen.